I think we're now at the point where we need to acknowledge that there's a possible version of the future where we never get regulatory clarity through Congress. It might only come via the judicial branch, and unfortunately, that might be SEC v. Coinbase 2033. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the central issue in the crypto war and why it may be 2033 before it's hashed out, a new bill to fire Gary Gensler, IOG spinning off some components, and things looking more and more like Binance might be tangling with the DOJ. If you're a little conflicted about whether judges wearing AR glasses in court in 2033 would make them more or less relatable, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Unfortunately, I think it's safe to say that crypto law in 2023 is an unmitigated train wreck. And I'm going to show you two posts, basically two posts. One of them is a couple posts together, but basically two posts that explain exactly why that's the case. The first problem is that we've basically been doing make-believe crypto law. At least a large portion of crypto has been doing pretend crypto law for a while. And I'm not saying the lawyers were doing pretend crypto law. I'm just saying there was this notion that existed in crypto about what the law was that doesn't seem to really have any basis in reality. And this post explains that. This post says, why certain organizations got to create their own reality with still no penalty to this day. With what did those orgs convince then head of corporate finance at SEC to magically add a fifth prong to Howey, that is sufficient decentralization. So there's a bunch of unspoken things here. So the first thing you need to know is that the Howey test has 4 prongs. It's an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits based solely on the efforts of others. There's 4 prongs. There is no 5th prong. But in crypto for a long time, we've pretended like there was this sufficient decentralization prong, the magical 5th prong of Howey that doesn't actually exist. There's no discussion of crypto or decentralization in the Howey test. This is something we've sort of been able to pretend exists. And, a lot of this is tied up in the whole Hinman email thing. It's like its own arena of crypto discourse at this point. It's been such a central thing in the Ripple litigation with the SEC. And of course, today is the day that those Hinman emails will be unsealed for the world to see. And for a long time, I think a lot of us in crypto have had the suspicion that there's probably some pretty embarrassing things in those emails, at least embarrassing for the SEC. Why else would they have fought so hard for those emails not to have been unsealed for all of our dirty little crypto eyes to avail themselves of, we're going to feast our dirty little crypto eyes on all those emails today. And it's going to be pretty entertaining. I think it's going to be pretty entertaining. But as of right now, because right now as I record, those emails have not been unveiled. So we don't know exactly what's going to be in those emails. But we do know for a long time, people have been in crypto basically been pretending like there was this magical 5th prong to Howey, which is not a part of the actual Howey test as laid out in the Howey case. So we have this problem, and it's not like crypto led necessarily is 100% at fault for leading itself astray. We were definitely led astray by a certain speech, by a certain figure who, whose emails may be unsealed today. So it's not entirely crypto's fault, but we very willfully went down that road. This road, we're pretending like there's a 5th prong to Howey. So there is not actually a 5th prong to Howey. Maybe someday there will be, but at least, a case that modifies Howey, some case law that adds some additional concepts to this Howey test, or maybe even throws the Howey test out as far as crypto goes, and we end up with something brand new. Maybe we end up with legislation that does this, but maybe we eventually end up with a case that does this. And that's the second part of this discussion. So let's think about why we're in this current predicament. I think one thing is pretty clear. If the party of the current administration controlled both the House and the Senate and the White House right now, they would probably very quickly pass some legislation that basically all crypto is a security. Gary Gensler can sentence any crypto holder directly to the hangman's noose. I'm like completely convinced that Elizabeth Warren would like gladly sign off on every single piece of that, as would whoever is controlling the White House, as would Gary Gensler's SEC, and a good portion of the current administration's party in the House. They would just, I think, probably sentence all of us to death, with a quickness or something, because they hate crypto so bad. Apparently, if we're to believe that party's propaganda, or at least the propaganda that's coming out of some very extreme element of that party, including some of the aforementioned people, we're to believe that crypto is basically on par with terrorism and narco trafficking and human trafficking. It's like that bad, and we should probably all just be sentenced to the gallows. That's about the closest approximation as I can come to, of their actual position. And that's probably the kind of legislation we would get if they controlled both chambers of the legislature and the executive branch here. But one thing they definitely do not control right now, much to their chagrin, is the U.S. Supreme Court and a lot of the rest of the judicial branch. So that's kind of the direction that this post is going in, which I think explains the other half of this. So this post says, at the heart of the are they or aren't they securities, and let's face it, that's really the discussion here. That's really the big debate. Are cryptocurrencies securities? Are they not? Which ones are? Which ones aren't? And more importantly, he says, at the heart of the are they or aren't they securities debate, which the chair of the SEC says isn't a debate, is a simple question that goes to the heart of administrative law and the constitutionally prescribed structure of federal government. Who decides? Who actually gets to decide whether or not they're securities? Because it's not at all the case that Gary Gensler gets to decide. That's not how this is supposed to work, really. The way this is supposed to work is the legislative branch decides, in this case, Congress would decide, what agencies have what authority. And there is no such legislation in existence in the history of the United States that says that the SEC has authority over crypto. Gary Gensler, of course, says, hey, U.S. securities laws are very broadly drawn. So, just a plain reading of the U.S. securities laws and the Howey test says, of course, the SEC has authority over crypto because they're obviously securities. And he has a good, I don't want to say Gary Gensler has a good point here, but I will say the U.S. securities laws, the definition of a security, at least the definition we've been laboring under, is so broadly drawn that almost anything could be a security. And in crypto, we joke about this all the time, saying the U.S. dollar is a security, saying that Louis Vuitton handbags are securities, that watches are securities, luxury watches, all these kinds of things. And you can, it's the definition is so broadly drawn that you can make, cases around almost anything like that. So this post goes on to say, the SEC says we do, and that's because Congress said that's so. In their book, Congress gave them incredibly broad discretion. Crypto says Congress does, that is, Congress is the one who decides, because they never gave that discretion to you, and they couldn't even if they wanted to. So that's sort of that last part is sort of a separate argument. Some people arguing that Congress couldn't give Gary Gensler and the SEC authority over crypto, even if they wanted to. I personally just like think about the first part of that. Congress has authority because they never gave that discretion to the SEC. And the Post says, the chair's only real concern here probably is that the current judiciary who decides how this is going to go would probably agree with the latter position, not his. And that could have profound effects on the purview of the SEC on all fronts, but he'd be gone by then. And it's looking more and more like this is the way this might end up going. So what's being implied here is that if we don't know what case in the future might actually hash out all these issues. If I had to pick between SEC v Coinbase and SEC v Binance, I would guess it would be Coinbase because there's so much other stuff going on in Binance. We have this possibility of the DOJ coming in, which we'll talk about in this video a little bit later. So I would guess it would be Coinbase. And we don't know what's going to happen in the Coinbase case. Litigation like this is highly complex and very unpredictable. A huge number of things could end up happening. But if a case like that were to go through the federal system, maybe it would go through district court, maybe it would go through the circuit court, maybe it would go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. What this poster is saying here is that probably the U.S. Supreme Court, just given its current composition, it would probably side with crypto. But Gary Gensler, he's no fool. Whatever we in crypto think about Gary Gensler, the man is no fool. He knows he will be long gone from the SEC by the time anything like that could possibly happen. It's so far down the road. In his mind, I'm sure he's already Secretary of the Treasury. And a political animal like Gensler doesn't think in terms of years or even 4-year terms of a president. He's been involved in agency politics for multiple presidents on that side of the aisle. He's seen presidents come and go while he's been at the helm of agencies like the CFTC and the SEC. And he might not even be thinking about, where he's going to be a year from November because he doesn't know who's going to win that election. But he knows that his party will come, even if they lose the election a year from November, eventually they'll come back into power. And that's probably when he wants to be Secretary of the Treasury. And he knows he won't even have to deal with these SEC problems. Somebody else will inherit this case. So for him, it doesn't even matter that much whether or not a case like this could go all the way to the Supreme Court and the SEC could lose because he'll be long gone. I wish we could say that that's all ridiculous and Congress will surely take care of this long before then. There's no way we would have to wait that long for crypto clarity. We'll get some kind of legislation, some kind of lawmaking that'll take care of all these problems. But think about what we've got. Right now, we've got a White House controlled by the left. We've got a Senate, depending on whose votes you're counting on the left, and the right. You've basically got the Senate barely controlled by the left by the vice president's vote. And you've got a House controlled by the right. The right, who are the ones, because crypto has been politicized. I strongly believe crypto should not be a partisan issue, but crypto has been very much politicized. Because the right is the party, that's the part of the political spectrum that would be most likely to pass the pro-crypto legislation, not to exclude some very enlightened senators and other Congress people on the left side of the aisle, like Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who is very, very pro-crypto. And there are others. She's not the only one. There are other people in Congress on the left who are very, very pro-crypto, and they'll be a part of a coalition to try to get these things passed. But currently, very difficult for the right to get anything through the Senate. Very, very difficult for them to get a crypto bill passed in the Senate that would be pro-crypto, because you're going to have a bunch of senators like the Dragon who are going to jump up and down and demand that everybody on the left side of the aisle be very, very, very anti-crypto. And then you've got the White House, who is going to try to veto anything that is at all pro-crypto. Anything short of send all the crypto holders to the gallows, I feel like the White House is probably going to just veto. And we don't know what's going to happen a year from November. We don't know. We might end up in the same situation where neither party controls both chambers of Congress. We might end up, that way for a long time. We just don't know. We can't necessarily count on Congress being able to pass any kind of constructive crypto bill. I certainly hope that's the case. I think it would be a wonderful thing for crypto if that actually happened, but we can't count on it. It may be that something that sounds as ridiculous as crypto clarity in 2033 via the judicial branch, it could be that's where we end up. Of course, I'm not predicting that, and I'm not hoping for that. What I hope happens is that a year from November in the election, things get pushed in the direction of crypto. And I personally don't care which side of the aisle people are on as long as they're pro-crypto. If we end up with a bunch more Senator Kirsten Gillibrands, great. If we end up with a bunch of people on the other side of the aisle who are pro-crypto, also great. I just hope the balance of crypto versus non-crypto improves in the next election. We can pass some good legislation to fix all these problems, and our worries are over. We'll see, though. This is politics. I think anything could happen. In the meantime, we might have to satisfy ourselves with this. Representative Warren Davidson says, today I filed the SEC Stabilization Act to restructure the SEC Gov and hashtag fire Gary Gensler. I love that he called it the SEC Stabilization Act, saying that the SEC, implying that the SEC is currently unstable and the only way to remedy it is to fire Gary Gensler. He says, U.S. capital markets must be protected from a tyrannical chairman, including the current one. It's time for real reform and to fire Gary Gensler as chair of the SEC. U.S. capital markets must be protected from a tyrannical chairman, including the current one. That's why I'm introducing legislation to fix the ongoing abuse of power and ensure protection that is in the best interest of the market for years to come. It's time for real reform and to fire Gary Gensler as chair of the SEC. He says, GOP Majority Whip Tom Emmer joined me in this critical fight to protect our markets. American investors and industry deserve clear and consistent oversight, not political gamesmanship. The SEC Stabilization Act will make common sense changes to ensure the SEC's priorities are with the investors that are charged to protect. They are charged to protect and not the whims of its reckless chair. And I hate to say it, but it certainly does feel like what we're suffering right now is not just, it's not just sort of, a pro-industry faction versus a faction that's like, hey, we need a little more regulation here. This has become a very, very politicized issue. And when you see all this happening at the same time as a prominent senator on the left, running these gigantic banners that say, I'm raising a crypto army, an anti-crypto army, it certainly feels more like the politics of the swamp and less like, a bunch of policymakers disagreeing on what's best for the American people. This might surprise some people, but IOG is spinning off some of its projects as individual companies. Charles posted this in response to a CoinDesk article. Seriously, we've been moving toward a venture studio model for 18 months in a pretty public way. Cardano is a platform, and the point is to build stuff on top of it. Thus, IOG has been spinning out companies like Midnight, Lace, and Prism. This means that you hire or move people to the subsidiaries and also restructure the parent company to be better suited to spinning out companies. I'm not sure how this gets written as a layoff story, but that's CoinDesk. It's about form following function, input, output, infrastructure, will do, Cardano development, Prism, identity, Midnight, data privacy and zero knowledge, Lace, wallet tech. This means each company eventually has their own CEOs, staff, and investors under the parent company. So I think this was kind of inevitable. I mean, IOG has always done so much inside the ecosystem. I think it was kind of inevitable that they would want to spin out some of these companies. And frankly, when a company gets too big, when they're doing too many things, they lose agility. And I mean that in the sense of like a person running running through hurdles in a race, not very, very specifically in the sense of software development. But imagine we have a whole company that just does identity with Prism. We have a whole company that just does the Midnight chain. We have a whole company just developing Lace, nothing else, no other distractions. They're just trying to make Lace the very best possible wallet. They're just trying to make Midnight the very best possible chain. They're just trying to make the very best identity products under Prism. Of course, this makes sense. Finally, it looks like things are unfortunately going in the direction everyone feared with Binance. This post says Binance and CZ have recently added an experienced lawyer. That is a huge understatement. An experienced lawyer, George Canelos, to their legal team. Canelos has an impressive background, having previously served as the chief of the Major Crimes Unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. That would be the DOJ, as well as heading the SEC's New York office and serving as the SEC Enforcement Division co-director. His diverse skill set combines experience at both the SEC and DOJ. So, to be clear, this is a person who was at the Major Crimes Unit at the DOJ in the Southern District of New York. He was also co-director of the SEC Enforcement Division. I have no idea how much he's charging Binance and CZ. But obviously, if CZ finds himself on the receiving end of criminal charges from the DOJ, whatever they're paying this George Canelos will probably be worth every single penny. Of course, I hope that doesn't happen to CZ, but given what came out in the SEC complaint that we'd kind of seen hints at earlier, this could be the direction that things are unfortunately going for Binance and CZ. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.